Okay, awesome. I think we can get started because we are streaming on Facebook Live now. And I'm guessing that people will trickle into, but yeah, let's get started. Thank you everyone for being here. Welcome to today's Fireside Chat, where we'll be talking about the sixth pillar in the Thrive Agenda, which is averting climate and environmental catastrophe. So to get us started, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat, drop your name, pronouns, and what Indigenous lands you're on, so we can get to know each other. My name is Nabi. I use she, her pronouns, and I am zooming in from Dena'ina, Acknowledgement in Anchorage. I'm a community organizer at the Alaska Center, and I'm going to be leading this fireside chat today. I'm really excited. This is a really big topic. I feel like there's a lot to talk about when it comes to climate and environmental catastrophes. But before we get started there, I want to offer up a land acknowledgement. I want to recognize that we're all here today on Indigenous lands. I'm on Dena'ina land in Anchorage. And I know that there are people zooming in from all over, from Ahtna lands, Lower Tanana, Dena'ina land, Qitiqdax and Tlingit too, and others as well. So it's really important that we're acknowledging the past, present, and future of Indigenous peoples in the work that we're doing. Because Indigenous people never surrendered their land or resources that we're still reaping the benefits of today. And many of the climate and environmental catastrophes that we're going to be touching on today are a direct result of the colonization that we still see every day and we still experience. So it's vital that we are decolonizing and indigenizing the work that we're doing so we can move towards a just transition. And to round off this land acknowledgement, I also want to say that today's Earth Day, and I'm really grateful for the land I come from and the land that I get to call home. And I'm very grateful for the generations of Indigenous peoples who have cared for and stewarded the land so that I can enjoy it now and we can all go outside and enjoy the sun. So tonight we are going to be talking about Pillar 6. We're going to start off with an overview of the Thrive Agenda and talk about some of the work that is being done by the Just Transition Collective. Then we're going to dive deeper into Pillar 6, talk about what's going on now, what it includes. And then later we're going to go off into breakout rooms and have a chance to share some of our experiences with climate and environmental catastrophes. And we're going to finish off by reconvening and talking about ways that we can move forward with Pillar 6. So in just a second, I'm going to hand it over to Polly to talk about the Thrive Agenda. But first, I am dropping these group agreements into the chat. And there we go. So group agreements are, first off, listen for understanding. We're not listening to respond. We're trying to understand. Be mindful. We aren't going to solve everything today. There's a lot to talk about here. So this is going to be a further conversation too. Unlearning is just as important as learning. Ouch, oops. If you hear something that rubs you the wrong way or that you're uncomfortable with, ouch, oops is just a way to acknowledge that and bring it to light. Stories stay and lessons leave. I wanted to highlight this one because we are hopefully going to be sharing stories. So please only share what you're comfortable with, and also remember that not all stories are for us to share. And the last one is wait, which stands for why am I talking or why aren't I talking? So please keep these group agreements in mind as we go through our discussion today. And Now I'd like to pass the mic to Polly, who's going to be giving us an overview of the Thrive Agenda. Polly, it's all you.
Thanks, Navi, and it's good to be with this intimate group here tonight, because I think that'll be great for more conversation. I'm Polly Carr. I use she/her pronouns, zooming in from unceded Dena'ina lands here in Anchorage, and also work with the Alaska Center. I guess what I first just wanted to ask, maybe through your icon on your screen, or if you have your screen on, a thumbs up, like who here has already heard of the Thrive Agenda, maybe because you participated in a previous webinar, or you're just somewhat familiar with what that is. See a couple of hands up, several hands up. Awesome. Okay. So I'll just give a quick recap then. This is an economic recovery bill for what we call post-COVID crisis, pre-climate crisis economic reconstruction that truly prioritizes racial, economic, and gender justice. And the Thrive Agenda also establishes a Thrive board, which consists of 10 to 20 members from selected labor, frontline communities, and tribes. And it's a funding dissemination structure to invest $1 trillion per year for 10 years into infrastructure, economic recovery, and many of the sustainability efforts and justice efforts that we're going to be talking about in more detail. Real briefly, there are 8 pillars to the agenda, and I'm going to name them and then I'll drop them in the chat. The first is on creating millions of good paying jobs with access to unions. The second is building the power of workers to fight inequality. The third is investing in Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Number 4, strengthening and healing the nation-to-nation relationship with sovereign Native nations. Number 5, combating environmental injustice and ensuring healthy lives for all. Number 6, averting climate and environmental catastrophe. That's what we're talking about tonight. Really light topic. Number 7, ensuring fairness for workers and communities affected by economic transitions. And number 8, reinvesting in public institutions that enable workers and communities to thrive. And we've been having a webinar, several webinars so far. We've got 3 more to go, where we're covering each of these pillars, not necessarily in numerical order. So this is number 6. I'm going to hand it back to Nabi to dig into that one.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for setting the scene for Pillar 6, which we'll dive into now. So like Polly said, Pillar 6 in the Thrive Agenda focuses on averting climate and environmental catastrophe. So in Alaska and in the Arctic, we are watching our climate change at twice the rate of the rest of the planet, which can be terrifying. Communities all around Alaska are facing melting permafrost and sea ice, rising sea levels, extreme coastal erosion, rapidly changing seasons, and increased wildfires and flooding events. These climate catastrophes have resulted in so many communities needing to relocate, lots of food insecurity in places that are already food insecure, and lots of direct and indirect pollution and harm towards the air, land, and water that we all exist on. And marginalized communities are always the ones at the front lines, and they're always the ones that are affected the most by these climate and environmental catastrophes. So the Thrive Agenda calls for keeping global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid increasing climate disaster and to build resilience and keep our communities safe. The Thrive Agenda will include the largest expansion in history of clean energy and emissions reductions, climate resilience, and sustainable resources use. And it'll transform the agriculture sector to uplift local family farms and farming communities and ensure that they are fairly compensated for their sustainable production of healthy, local, and secure food. All in all, Pillar 6 calls for us to take quick and strategic action to avert further catastrophes than we've already seen going on for ages, and to strengthen our communities. We need clean and sustainable energy that works for all of us and is made for us. We need secure and healthy food systems that are accessible and available to all. We need efforts that are guided by our Indigenous communities and tribes for everything from sustainable agriculture and food production to our climate response and to our use of resources and energies. And we need these solutions to be accessible, affordable, and reliable for all across Alaska. So that's a little bit about Pillar 6 and what the Thrive Agenda is calling for. And now I wanted to invite Matt Jackson from the Southeast Alaska Conservation Council to talk about what's being done more at a federal and state level that supports this sixth pillar and what we can do to take action.
Thank you, Navi. Really appreciate laying it out. And so, I think most of us gathered here today are probably aware that there's a lot of things happening to avert this climate catastrophe. And, despite our gathered here best efforts, like we're still feeling some of those impacts. And there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that Alaska can avoid the worst of this climate chaos. And there's two opportunities for action this week in the coming 7 days that I want to highlight for you. Not just as two examples of really great things to do. And I'm going to start at the state level. You may have heard of the Green Bank bill that Dunleavy actually introduced last week. It's a really mixed bag, and it's very interesting and nuanced. Green banks are pretty awesome. Whatever you may think about the whole concept of financing, a green bank is a quick and effective way of getting technologies that are going to reduce emissions into people's lives. And so on one hand, it's really cool that the legislature is considering a bill that would fund a green bank in Alaska to the tune of $10 million, which is a good start. $10 million is better than none. We'll definitely need a lot more. $10 trillion through the Thrive Agenda is what we really need. But $10 million for the Green Bank is not a bad start for a state like Alaska. The kind of fatal flaw with the bill as it is written right now is that it's housed inside of the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Agency, ADA. And as I think most of us know, ADA's not good for Alaska. They're a really not a transparent organization. There's very little accountability to the public, much less even the legislature from ADA. So even though a green bank would be really good, housing it in ADA is pretty bad because there's no guarantee that the transparency and accountability that we need for these green bank projects to go to the right places. There's no guarantee that any of that will happen. It could end up tied up in some kind of boondoggle like an Alaskan natural gas pipeline, because we know Dunleavy is a big fan of that. So luckily, we have a public process coming up next week to provide feedback. There's a hearing on next Friday at 8 a.m., I believe, 4:30, April 30th, Friday at 8 a.m. And there's an opportunity to call in and testify. I think, Navi, thank you for dropping that link. If you check that link, you'll see a lot more information about opportunities to testify and also the date and time. And you can also, if you can't make that time, I know I don't love waking up at 8 a.m. to testify and, pretty dry hearings. I'm just going to encourage you to send an email to the House Labor and Commerce Committee outlining these talking points, letting them know why you think the Green Bank needs the amendments that are outlined. basically the amendments would increase the transparency and provide further clarity on restricting what the Green Bank can fund. And I think that without those amendments, it's not worth it to pass this Green Bank if it's going to rest within ADA because of the flaws in ADA's system. So that's one opportunity for action at the state level that we can all take next week. There's another opportunity at the federal level. I'm sure most of you have heard of the American Jobs Plan. The American Jobs Plan is kind of like the Thrive Agenda light. I would say it's much smaller. It is a good down payment on what the climate crisis requires and what the Thrive Agenda lays out. It does a lot of things. It would do a lot of really good things for Alaska's economy and for Alaska's climate. It would put a lot of people to work in electrification. It creates a pathway to 100% renewable electrical generation by 2035. It would increase broadband to all Americans. Right now, 25% of Alaskans have no access to broadband, even if they could afford it. It's just not available in their communities. So these are problems that the American Jobs Plan would address. But of course, it has to pass through the Senate. And so on Monday, there's a national call-in day to senators all over the country, calling them to tell them that we support the American Jobs Plan. And while that's important for people anywhere in the country to do, obviously Senator Murkowski is a crucial swing vote for this. And we've seen time and again that Senator Murkowski can come through when it's really important to her constituents. We saw that when she voted in favor of Deb Haaland's nomination to Secretary of Interior. We saw that when she voted to uphold the Affordable Care Act. And she has expressed some willingness to support the American Jobs Plan. She was basically in the paper earlier this week, just asking Biden where the bacon is. She's like, what can I bring home to Alaska? And it was, she brought up electrifying ferries, which I don't agree with Murkowski on a lot of things, but I think electrifying ferries is a great idea. So, I want to be getting on the phone with her and her staff and writing letters saying like, hey, you talked about electrifying ferries last week. Like, let's do it. Put it into the American Jobs Plan and then vote for it. And there's so many other great benefits for Alaska. Modernizing our water systems in rural Alaska, drinking water and wastewater. So there's a number that you'll be able to dial in on Monday. Thank you, Navi, for dropping that in the chat. I'm sure many of us have Senator Murkowski's office on speed dial. I know that I do. But if you don't, you can call this 1-800 number free, and it will connect you through to your senators. So those are two actions that Alaskans can take, both like right here in our state and at the federal level, to help avert some of this climate catastrophe. And I guess the final thing that I'll say is that even though the American Jobs Plan or the Green Bank is not to the same level as the Thrive Agenda, I think anything that we can do to push in the direction of the Thrive Agenda is going to be really amazing, especially when we talk about Governor Dunleavy or Senator Murkowski. They're so far to the right that anything we can do to push them towards the American Jobs Act or a Green Bank is pushing them closer and closer to Thrive, because sooner or later, we're going to have to pass something like Thrive. The scale of this crisis is just too big. So yeah, thanks for listening to me. Thanks for inviting me to share those actions. And I will pass the mic back.
Thank you. Yeah, all of the information is in the chat. And Matt, to what you were saying about we need to push something like this. I remember when I was first learning about Thrive, I think Ine was saying we have to ask for the most because we're not going to get that the first time around. We have to keep pushing and ask for everything we need and more because there's a lot of work to do and there's a lot of time, not so much for this, but we need to get the most out of it. Sweet, thank you for sharing those actions. I also have Murkowski on speed dial, but it's always good to call. So now we are going to move into more of a discussion, a section of the evening, and we're going to be going into breakout rooms in just a second. And in these breakout rooms, I wanted to ask you all to share your experiences that you've had with environmental and climate catastrophes, because I feel like we all have stories in Alaska and around just climate change and how we've seen it. So experiences of climate and environmental catastrophes that you've seen, what stands out to you as important and what is concerning to you and what you're worried about for the future. And I will put these questions in the chat too. And we'll have 15 minutes in these breakout rooms, and then we'll come back and share some like common topics that we talked about, and also talk about some steps forward. So yeah, we can head off into our breakout rooms now. I think that we'll probably only have like 2. Delula, are you able to start the, oh, okay, sweet, thank you. See y'all soon.
All right, is this our group? Awesome. Well, I know we have like some people on screen and other people off, but maybe it would be great. I think this is designed to just be like a casual conversation. So it'd be great to, I don't know, I think quickly hear who all's here and where you're zooming in from. And then we could just get into it. Does that sound good? And I'm Polly. I'm in Anchorage. I introduced myself earlier. I could go to Glenna.
Okay, hi everyone, Glenna Gannon. I'm calling in from Lower Dena'ina Lands in what is now known as Fairbanks. What are we introducing? I'm born and raised here. I work at the university currently. However, I've lived and been lucky enough to live and work in a number of different parts of Alaska. And actually in Canada as well. So I have a few different perspectives on environmental changes that I guess have brought me here today.
Awesome. Yeah, and thanks, Glenna, for just trying that out. I think we're just doing exactly what you shared, just a really quick round of intros so we can jump into the questions. Nori, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Nari Toller. I am in Eagle River, unceded territory of the Dena'ina lands. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank right now. I'm gonna popcorn it over. Maybe I'll, how about Noea? Or not popcorn, but.
Oh, couldn't find the unmute button, sorry. I'm Noea, he, him, his pronouns, and I work at Native Movement, and I'm just introducing myself, is that all?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I'll pass it to, how about Mel?
Hi, I'm Mel. Sorry about this camera thing. I can't figure out how to get it in the right position. I'm zooming in from Dena'ina land in Anchorage. I'm retired civil engineer, and most of my practice has been Alaska, and lots of changes even in the infrastructure part of these things are coming down the pipeline. So I'm very interested.
Why don't we go to Courtney?
Hi, I'm Courtney Owen, she, her pronouns. I am living and working on the unceded lands of the Dena'ina people, and I work for the Alaska Community Action on Toxics.
Awesome. And I'll just call on, I'll say Zoe. I see Zoe in here.
Hi all. Let's see if I can get my video on. My name is Zoe Fuller. I'm calling in from Ahtna and Dena'ina lands here outside of Palmer, Alaska. I run a small farm called Singing Nettle Farm, and I'm grateful to be talking to you all today. And I use she, her pronoun. And I'll let someone else decide who's next.
I think it's Terry and Donovan. So Terry, do you want to go next?
Hi, Polly. I'm Terry Chapman from Dena'ina Lands in Fairbanks. I am a volunteer with Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition. Thank you.
And I'll just hop right in. I'm Donovan. I am also zooming in from Dena'ina Lands here in Anchorage. And I'm currently the finance intern with the Fairbanks Climate Action Coalition Regenerative Economies Working Group, and then also working on a political campaign. So it's been a busy day. I'm fitting in my first meal, and sorry for not having my camera on, but I'm excited to be here and talk with you all.
Donovan, very impressed with your like triple tasking right now. That's awesome. Well, again, I think this is just a really casual meaning like we're not very formal, but a very critical topic, obviously. But to Nabi's question, you know, where are we seeing this sort of catastrophic change, and like what is important to you in terms of addressing this within the realm of the Thrive agenda? I just want to leave it open, see how people want to weigh in.
So just to clarify, the idea of what we're identifying here, discussing, is the things we would hope that get represented in the Thrive agenda from when we're talking about Alaskanizing it. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Nabi's initial questions were kind of grounding us in like, what are we seeing? Like what needs to be addressed? But I think we should take the conversation where people want to take it for this breakout.
I've got my mic on, so I'll go. I work predominantly in food systems. So I mentioned I'd lived in other places. And so from 2016 to 2019, I was living part of the year in Norton Sound, Alaska, in Unangan. And one of the main things in terms of environmental changes that gets discussed a lot out there and is a source of a lot of unease, for like not even a sufficient word, is changes to the fisheries, to salmon and the marine environment. So salmon is kind of king. Everyone talks about, Chinook going away, and general changes in populations and other species, especially species that weren't formerly there, coming in and predating on traditionally important cultural foods. So that's one thing from that part of the state. And I know a lot of other parts of the state, including our relatives over on the Canadian side of the border, who experience dramatic impacts to their migratory fisheries. So I have a friend from the Champagne-Atiac tribal community in what's known as the Yukon, I guess now. And so she was telling me that it has been 15 years since they've harvested Chinook for community consumption. And so these are the kinds of things that I think from not only a resource perspective, but a cultural perspective are really critical. And I think you ask anyone anywhere in the state if who's tied in with fish, if they've seen, experienced, perceived changes, and you'd probably get an earful. So I won't go too in depth anymore about that, but if anyone has questions, I can talk more about it. And then in my capacity here in Fairbanks, working at the Agriculture and Forestry Experiment Station, there's been a lot of changes just in the last 5 years that I've been working in this position. A lot of changes in our growing season, a lot of changes in what we're able to grow, what was historically a really reliable crop and or cultivar for our environment. That's changing, as well as pest pressures on different crops. So one big one that we've never had here in the interior before that has really increased is slugs. And so some people might feel like, oh yeah, everyone's got slugs. Well, I grew up here and we didn't used to have slugs. And now that's something we're seeing as, along with other weed species and pest species. So those are the kinds of things I'm seeing. I mean, what that tells me is there's a northward shift based on climate warming and range and habitat changes for a lot of pests. Spruce bark beetles are another prime example of that. They're right up against the Alaska range now, and I fully expect we'll see them north of the Alaska range in the next year or two. So yeah, we've got a lot of really multifaceted challenges ahead of us in terms of our environment and the pressures on our food system.
Super appreciate that, Glenna, and glad to have you frame like salmon and fishing right front and center, because it feels like Alaskans really identify with that. And when you look at like the National Thrive Agenda, they talk a lot about agriculture and local foods, but I think when we talk about Alaskanizing, we also want to make sure we're including like the sort of hunting, fishing aspects of also our local foods. Would anybody else like to share like about like these major catastrophes or concerns that you want to focus on?
I think that our so in Southeast, we usually, get a lot of rain. We've had some droughts in the last few years where it's like we still get rain, but less rain than we're supposed to in a rainforest, And then I also think of changes in the amount of berries that we get. Like the berry season has changed, and how many berries and how big they are. And then I also think about we've never historically had ticks in Southeast Alaska, but in the last few years I've heard about people finding ticks on their dogs every now and then.
So all these changes, right? Changes in pests too, right? to back up what Glenna was also saying. Terry, your mic was off. Did you want to share anything too?
Yes, I really appreciate what's just been said. It's one of the things that strikes me is that there are all of these changes, and the communities that are the people that are closest to where these changes are happening are small native villages in rural Alaska. Those are the people that are seeing the changes, that are best poised to steward responses to these changes. And I think recognizing that it's not the population centers that should control what's going to happen, but the people that are out on the land, the people that are experiencing these things, and the people who have the capacity and the knowledge to do something about it. That's where the actions need to take place, in my opinion.
Yeah, and when we look at like some of the national legislation that is being proposed and a lot of the different areas around adaptation or clean energy, et cetera, I'm still learning this, but it's like a lot of those decisions are made based on population centers. And I think there's a really important call from Alaska that needs to happen about like how we define like areas that are going to be receiving investment or working on support for solutions, because it can't just be these large population centers, because that's not where everyone's feeling.
Our most valuable resources are our lands and our culture and our people, and that should be where the focus of trying to navigate these times of climate change should be focused, I would think.
Does anybody else want to share a response to this prompt? Because I think they're gonna pull us out of the breakout room in a few minutes here. And Zoe, I know you're with us. I'm not sure how long you are going to be with us tonight, but I don't know if you had any other perspectives on food because of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm loving hearing what's already been said. And yeah, I think agriculture is complex, right? And I'm interested to hear that it's part of the National Thrive agenda in such a way. And we all, and Glenna spoke to this too, you know, agriculture in Alaska is unique. And I think currently we're really small scale. Many of the farms are small, led by women, and my hunch and observation throughout working with many small farmers is that a lot of them are using like ecologically sound practices, whether they say they're organic or not. But you know, in the long run, I could see that really shifting with climate change as certain areas become more accessible for agriculture here. So that's one thing I think, you know, staying true to like our ethics of stewardship in Alaska with agriculture specifically. Yeah, I guess I see that as important and something that I don't know, that I reflect on a lot.
Yeah, and how will small farms really be supported and sustained going forward? Yeah. Anybody else want to share anything? I thought they would have pulled us out of the breakout group by now, but I'd say if you want to drop any more knowledge on us from anyone else, we've probably got another minute. Brianna, really good to see you.
Hi, Polly. It's nice to see you. Yeah, I'm joining a little bit late, but Noea was very gracious and dropped the questions to me in the chat. I just wanted to add on what was said a bit already about changes in Southeast, and also add to what Glenna had mentioned around salmon. And I'm calling in from Juneau, Alaska, Tlingit, and the Taku, Stikine, and Unangan rivers down here are salmon powerhouses. Historically, 80% of the Chinook produced in Southeast Alaska comes from those three rivers. And this year, Alaska Department of Fish and Game is poised to list the Taku and Stikine as stocks of concern, and the Unangan was listed in 2017. So I think that adds to a lot of what we're seeing all around the salmon coast, if you will, in terms of salmon runs and how that ties into the climate crisis. And I think just tying into how that's important to me on a number of levels. But the Taku River is 55 miles away from my home as the salmon swims. And I think as I've been living here for almost 7 years and have really come to love the salmon people systems that define Southeast Alaska and life here. So to me, that's really concerning and certainly a big part of my life. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and listen to all of you.
Really appreciate that. I'm glad to see you here tonight. And hi, Doug. Glad to have you jump in our breakout group too. I don't know how long this breakout group is lasting. I'm just going to go with it now. So if anybody else wants to continue this conversation about like catastrophic impacts you're seeing or things that you're most concerned about, because I think this conversation is going to go to, as we look at Alaskanizing the Thrive agenda, like what about the elements of this pillar do we think are going to be really important to elevate? And I think the whole conversation around fish is huge because we talk about local foods, but I don't know how that translates in terms of Alaska and fishing and the Thrive agenda. So it's something for us to be thinking about. I don't know, Doug, if you had anything to share. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. In 2000, if the question is what catastrophic impacts have you seen, in 2015 we went to Kichyát like we always do in the fall to fill the freezer trip with fishing, and off the south coast when we went out fishing, there were dead birds on the water, and it's like every 50 yards there was another dead seabird, just it's just all day long, and the captain said he'd never seen anything like that. And I understand it kind of repeated for the next 2 years, but it was related to that warm water blob that was sitting out in the Gulf of Alaska, and you know, the nutrient-rich water that wells up out of the deep, it hits the thermocline and it doesn't get to the surface, so the birds all starve. You know, the problem, the birds were starving. If the birds are starving, you know, so are the fish and the whales, and so it's the persistence of very warm waters where we shouldn't have warm water is going to be a problem going in the new normal, you know, going out 20, 40 years. It concerns me.
Thanks, Doug. And now we're back in the big group again. Nabi, we were having a good conversation about fishing and how that's going to be impacted as we talk about the food aspect of the Thrive agenda. So
yeah, it sounds like it. And building off of that, I wanted to ask if anyone felt inclined to share some of the conversations that happen in these breakout rooms. Does anyone want to start?
I could maybe just re-emphasize what I started to say, which is that when we were talking about the local food production and how Thrive Agenda is going to support that, I think for Alaskans, it's like salmon fishing, and like, how does that play into this? And then I think another question was about population size. A lot of times when federal legislation is enacted, there are population thresholds for how and where investments are made. And we are feeling some of the greatest impacts in some of the smallest populations. So how does that Alaskanize the Thrive agenda and where priorities are placed?
So I'll add to that, since I was in the same group with Polly, and because I have to jump off here soon for another workshop. But in our discussion, we were talking about how, in terms of Alaskanizing the Thrive agenda, making sure that the social ecological connections are really represented in the Alaskanized version. So, you know, there's talk of agriculture and sustainable agriculture being represented in the Thrive, you know, agenda and hopefully bill. And in Alaska, that's not the full picture. And oftentimes agriculture means, not often, but it does. I mean, this is, you know, my area of work. So I'll just say in Alaska, agriculture is something very different than it is in the lower 48. So, you know, working with organizations like the Alaska Food Policy Council, the Alaska Farmland Trust, whomever, to make sure that what we talk about in terms of agriculture is representative of our unique agricultural scene here. And then also getting back to the small communities, getting back to our wild foods. Alaska, both rural and urban, but with an emphasis on rural. These communities are heavily reliant on country foods for harvesting, fishing, hunting. And that's another thing that's often not included in terms of funding opportunities, federal policy, so on and so on, and is crucially important to Alaska. So talking about how to Alaskanize this, I think that must be central in terms of talking about our needs for a sustainable and thriving food system. So I'll just kind of stop there, but I can elucidate more on that. Oh, and so fisheries, yeah, salmon, I think is really a central, you know, when we talk about like keystone species. I think we can talk about salmon in that sense in this agenda. It kind of unites us all. And I liked, I think it was Brianna who mentioned the term salmon people systems. So that's a good way to frame it for Alaska. We're all connected by salmon, and then it trickles over to our relatives on the Canadian side of the border too. So it's it's really not just us, it's everyone along these river systems.
Thank you. I love hearing that. We in our group, we talked a little bit more about resource extraction and how Alaska is so often seen as like we just have a lot of resources that we can give, and it's been offered up as like pretty much a sacrifice. Yeah, with the lower 48, we showed us a map of a bunch of like proposed mines and dams and a lot of extractive resource development. And Alaska is so often disregarded in that sense, where people don't always realize that there are very strong communities that are living here and that are already on this land. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we talked about. Okay, so if there's nothing else to share now, I think that we can move on to this open conversation part where I wanted to lighten up a little bit and talk about solutions and hope for the future, because we have a lot of work to do and we can do some really exciting things. So before we get into doing a group discussion, I first wanted to invite Terry Chapman, who is a FCAC member and a retired ecologist from the University of Alaska. And he was going to talk about some ways we could move forward with this.
Thanks, Nabi. I wanted to start by asking what are some of the unique things that Alaskans can do that we're disproportionately poised to be able to do that might not be possible in other states. And one of those things is to tell our stories. And each of you, at least the people in our breakout group, had wonderful stories to tell. And I think conveying those stories about why climate change is important and what actions have been taken to address climate change and to adapt to climate change are really important. A second thing that we're well poised to do is to engage our leadership at state and national levels. There's very few states that have such a small population communicating with our national leaders. And so talking to our congressional representatives and getting them to push for the agendas that we believe in, I think is really important. Lisa Murkowski, for example, has often spoken out in really receptive ways to AFN. And so I think keeping those channels of communication open and pushing Alaskan agendas there would be a useful thing to do. Another thing that Alaskans can do is to diversify our economy. We're one of the states that's maybe a poster child of being addicted to oil, and yet we have such wonderful renewable resource opportunities. And if we push that and get out of this trap of dependence on fossil fuels, I think that could be a role model for the rest of the country. So those are things that I think we can do. Another thing that strikes me as important is just living and celebrating our lives in nature. And realizing how important this connection is and getting our kids out and involved in doing things in nature. One of my favorite places to go is the village of Qitiqdax. The people there are always taking their kids out and doing things. And what they do in their daily lives, what they do professionally, is not separated in any way with what they do with their kids. It's a really wonderful thing to see the way they've invested themselves in their kids' future by getting the kids engaged in things. So those are things that I think each one of us can do in one way or another. Just thinking about the categories of things we can do, there's individual actions we can take. And one of those is celebrating nature, like I was just talking about. That's just downright fun. And we should do it because that's how we build things for the next generation. Because we're not talking about just getting through the next 5 years. We're talking about building a community that will live and carry this on for a long time, for the 7th generation. Another thing I think is to find ways to communicate effectively about climate change. I think 75% of Americans never talk about climate change over the course of a year. It's just not on their radar screen. So we need to find ways to bring that conversation up and to do it partly in a way that makes them aware of the challenges that we face as a society, but also in ways that connect with things that we care about and that they might care about. So this means finding ways in which we have common concerns about the future, what we care about our children, what we care about our communities. And communication built on those common, the things that we share, I think is a good way to forward. There's a lot of political action that can happen based on just all of the ways in which citizens participate politically, keeping ourselves informed, voting, taking action in pushing our leaders and engaging in government and pushing to reduce inequalities through protests and making more visible the challenges that we face as a society. Challenging the inequities. I think climate change is just a smaller piece of the bigger issue of injustice and inequity, and that those two conversations need to be part of the two pieces of the same conversation. So that's probably a good enough start.
Thank you. Yeah, in our breakout group, we also talked about how environmental justice and climate change and everything that we see going on is very much intertwined. Thank you for the words, Terry. And now I was going to open it up to a group conversation. If anyone had thoughts or questions or comments. And to start us off, I actually wanted to talk about food because personally that's something that I could learn more about and I want to learn more about. And honestly, I think that it is one of our biggest issues because the communities that are food insecure are the ones that are getting hit the hardest by these climate and environmental catastrophes, and you need food to survive. That's the most basic thing. And when people don't have access to food and they are in situations where their entire lives are falling apart because of coastal erosion or wildfires, it gets us into a lot of problems. So I wanted to call on Zoe if you wanted to talk about how our agriculture and food systems can be made to be sustainable and equitable.
Yeah, thanks, Nabi. Hi, y'all. For those who I haven't met, my name is Zoe Fuller. and I run a small regenerative farm called Singing Nettle Farm. And I just want to share an observation that I shared somewhat in our breakout group. But I think that Alaska has a lot of strengths when it comes to small farms. And I think that there's ways that our small farms can not be of detriment to our wild food resources. With conventional agriculture, we see impact to fish populations, we see impact to wildlife populations. But one thing that I observe is that farms in Alaska are often pretty small, which I think is a strength. Most farms, gosh, I forget the numbers exactly, but there are statistics on this. They're a couple acres. And I think, yeah, that's a strength when our farms are embedded in their communities, when they're managed and operated, on that really small scale, so that the folks who are getting the food out know exactly what's going on and have that ethic of stewardship. I think, yeah, so like right now, Alaska does that incredibly well. And about half of our farmers are women. And I think that's a strength as well. And it's notable. I think that there are ways to support sustainable agriculture in both addressing or like sustainable agriculture as a way of addressing climate issues, as well as supporting small farmers to start businesses or to increase it. There's so much to be said around how that could be better supported. And I think it's a worthwhile conversation to kind of look at Alaska's really distinct relationship to food, especially in some of our more rural communities. There's a lot of amazing leadership statewide, taking that on. And so I think Alaskanizing it, and Alaskan can serve as a model and an inspiration, I think, for other places nationwide.
Thank you, Zuri. I feel like a lot of how we address climate and environmental catastrophes, our approach to it has to be very localized and put into the hands of the people. And with having like community farms or family farms and stuff, you're able to know where all your food comes from. For other programs, like I wanted to bring up the Solarize program that helps people get solar panels onto their homes, and they are now making their own power and helping their community out too. So a lot of our approach has to be putting this power into the hands of the people that are going to be benefiting from it and that are affected by it. Thank you. Sweet. So now I wanted to just open it up to more of a broad discussion. If we wanted to talk about what other solutions we want to see when addressing climate and environmental catastrophes, and where they need to be coming from. Does anyone want to start us off? Okay. Sorry, we're gonna go ahead.
I was just going to ask if you could repeat one more time, because I have a response, or put it in the chat, either or.
I just wanted to close us out with a quick discussion about what other solutions we want to see to avert climate and environmental disasters and catastrophes, and where they need to be coming from.
So I have a quick thing to say on that, I think. And well, sorry, I don't have my video on, guys, but I am here. And basically, I'm relatively new to Alaska. I've only been up here for a year and a half. And so I don't claim to have like the experiences that you guys do and the connection to this place just yet. Although I do feel like I've built a quick one. Just Alaska has that effect on people, and especially me. But I think a big thing that I've been focusing on, especially through my capacity with FCAC, is the tools that we can build to empower, like Cherry was talking about, like the folks who have that firsthand experience and like those frontline, not only fights with climate change or, you know, the need to address them, but also the solutions in mind, and they just need whatever support is available. So I think the Green Bank is super important. I think the connections that we build through webinars like these and organizations that are involved in just information sharing and idea sharing, and just generally empowering people who do have those ideas. So whether it's the financial support, sharing ideas, just bridging those gaps and everything like that too. So it's not so much I have the single idea, but just continuing to network and support others and just like uplift the state as a whole.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I see some great opportunities popping up in the chat. Matt and Terry gave us great options for how we can move this forward. But I think that we can probably start to close out now. I want to thank you all for your time and for the great conversations that we've had. This is a very heavy topic and very multifaceted. So the conversation does not end here. And there's always going to be new stuff coming up too. So thank you all for being here. I'm putting a link for an exit survey in the chat if you wanted to leave us feedback. It would be much appreciated. But other than that, the next Fireside chat is going to be on next Tuesday, April 27th at 5 p.m., where we're going to be talking about the next pillar in the Thrive Agenda, which is about ensuring fairness for workers in communities that are affected by economic transition. So with that, I think that we can close out now. Thank you everyone for sharing stories and for this discussion, and happy Earth Day.
Thank you, Nabi. Good to see everybody.